I am Ethan, and for most of my life, I believed that success meant stability. I took pride in being the kind of man people relied on: methodical, practical, and composed. Emotions, while I had them, weren't something I wore openly. Instead, I focused on providing for my family and excelling in my career. That's the kind of man I thought Olivia, my wife, wanted: dependable. Olivia was everything I wasn't. She was vibrant, her energy filling the spaces in our life together. Where I found comfort in logic, she sought meaning in memories. She had a way of romanticizing the past, often reminiscing about her high school days, when she was the star of every stage, the subject of admiration. I didn't fully understand her nostalgia, but I found it endearing. It was a window into the parts of her life I hadn't been a part of. Our marriage was built on balance. Her spontaneity complemented my steadiness. It wasn't fireworks every day, but it worked. We had a good life together, one defined by quiet evenings on the couch, the clink of coffee mugs in the morning, and the silent understanding of two people who had shared years of their lives. Yet, as time passed, I realized that while we shared a home and a life, we seemed to inhabit separate worlds. Looking back, maybe I should have noticed how often she brought up her past lately. Her stories about her school plays, her friends, and even old flames had become a little more frequent, a little more wistful. I didn't think much of it. Everyone enjoys remembering who they were before life settled them into routines. But now, I wonder if it was more than nostalgia. When she mentioned her high school reunion, I barely looked up from the spreadsheet I was working on. "That sounds nice," I said, my attention focused on the numbers in front of me. "You should go. Catch up with everyone." She smiled, but I didn't notice the flicker of something else in her expression at the time. Excitement? Nervousness? I wasn't paying close enough attention. "Are you sure you don't want to come?" she asked, though we both knew the answer. "Not really my scene," I replied, offering a faint smile. "You'll have a better time without me tagging along." And just like that, the decision was made. She would go, and I would stay behind, as I always did when it came to things like this. It felt natural, easy, our roles unchallenged. Olivia would shine in a room full of people, while I would sit in the quiet hum of my office, chipping away at the endless to-do list that came with my job. The night of the reunion, she looked radiant. Her dress was something new, something that hugged her figure just enough to remind me how beautiful she was. She twirled in front of the mirror, laughing softly. "Do I look okay?" she asked. "Perfect," I replied, meaning it. But I stayed seated at my desk, immersed in emails. I didn't notice the extra care she'd put into her makeup, the nervous way she adjusted her earrings. "Don't wait up," she said, her voice carrying a mix of excitement and something I couldn't quite place. "I won't," I called back. And with that, she was gone. It wasn't until much later that I would reflect on that moment, the ease with which I had let her walk out the door, trusting in the foundation we had built. I'd spent our marriage believing that trust and routine were enough, that stability was love's strongest pillar. I had no idea how wrong I was. The high school reunion was held at a fancy event center, a place Olivia had described as too grand for a group of aging former teenagers. But judging by the photos I'd later see on social media, it was breathtaking. String lights draped from the ceiling, casting a golden glow over the room. Oversized posters of their yearbook photos adorned the walls, a mix of youthful grins and outdated hairstyles. For Olivia, it must have felt like stepping back into her glory days. She'd been the golden girl back then, the lead in every play, the one everyone knew and secretly admired. She had a story about everyone in her class, their quirks, and their drama. I used to love hearing those tales, especially in the early days of our marriage, when her enthusiasm made everything sound magical. But over the years, those stories became background noise. I didn't think twice when she left that evening. She had kissed me goodbye, her lips tasting faintly of the red wine she sipped while getting ready. I stayed in my office after she walked out the door, focused on my work, her laughter still echoing faintly in the hallway. Meanwhile, Olivia arrived at the reunion to the kind of fanfare she always drew in a crowd. Her classmates greeted her with open arms and exaggerated exclamations about how little she had aged. She played along, laughing and joking about wrinkle creams and miracle serums. But as the night unfolded, her confidence wavered. There was something about being surrounded by so many familiar faces, each of them carrying their own successes, failures, and changes, that made her reflect on herself. Then she saw him. Ryan stood by the bar, a glass of whiskey in hand. Even at a distance, he exuded the effortless charm she remembered from their youth. His salt and pepper hair and sharp suit made him look distinguished, and his easy smile was the same one that had captivated her when she was 17. For a moment, she froze, overwhelmed by the sudden flood of memories. Their eyes met, and Ryan's face lit up in recognition. He made his way toward her with the same self-assured stride that had always made her heart race. "Olivia," he said, his voice rich and smooth. "It's been too long." And just like that, the years melted away. They fell into conversation as if no time had passed, reminiscing about their teenage antics and the stolen moments behind the gym. Ryan had stories she didn't even remember, details she thought she'd forgotten. The night blurred into a haze of laughter, drinks, and music. At one point, Ryan asked her to dance, and she hesitated, glancing around the room. But he didn't give her time to refuse. He took her hand and led her to the dance floor, their steps awkward at first but quickly finding an old rhythm. As they swayed to the music, Olivia felt the weight of her life, the routine, the predictability, slip away. She wasn't the wife of a stoic, career-driven husband or the woman who spent her days tidying their quiet home. For those moments, she was the girl Ryan had once loved, carefree and alive. After the reunion officially ended, some guests lingered in the parking lot, unwilling to let the night end. Olivia and Ryan found themselves leaning against his car, sharing secrets under the stars. The alcohol loosened their tongues, and for the first time in years, she let herself be vulnerable. She admitted how much she missed the spark of excitement, the thrill of being desired. Ryan listened, his gaze never wavering. When he leaned in to kiss her, she didn't pull away. She would later tell herself it was the wine, the nostalgia, the loneliness, but deep down, she knew better. That kiss wasn't an accident. By the time Olivia came home, the clock had passed midnight. I was still awake, finishing a report on my laptop, but she slipped in quietly, thinking I was asleep. I noticed how she moved soft steps, careful not to make noise, and how she lingered at the bathroom mirror longer than usual. The next morning, she was cheerful but unusually quiet, sipping her coffee with a faraway look in her eyes. I chalked it up to fatigue. "How was the reunion?" I asked casually, scrolling through my phone. "It was nice," she replied, smiling faintly. "A lot of old faces. Some I barely recognized." She told me a few stories about the night, funny anecdotes about her classmates' antics, tales of unexpected career changes, but none of them mentioned Ryan. What I didn't know then was that she had left the reunion with more than memories. Before they parted ways, Ryan had slipped her his number, scribbled on the back of a napkin. "In case you ever want to talk," he'd said with a smile that held more meaning than the words. Over the following weeks, I began to notice small changes in Olivia. She started checking her phone more often, her expression softening whenever a notification lit up the screen. She spent extra time in the mirror before her girls' nights, her lipstick applied with more precision than I was used to seeing. I didn't question it at first. Why would I? I trusted her. Ours was a marriage built on respect and honesty, or so I thought. But trust can make you blind to what's right in front of you. And for Olivia, trust was the perfect cover. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Olivia's behavior, while slightly different, didn't immediately set off alarm bells. She was still warm, still attentive when we were together, but there was a subtle shift I couldn't quite name. Little things caught my attention, how she'd keep her phone face down on the table during dinner or excuse herself to take calls in the other room. I brushed it off as my imagination. Olivia had always been social, and it wasn't unusual for her to keep in touch with friends. But the gnawing feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. The first real crack appeared about 2 weeks after the reunion. My friend Mark, who works in corporate event planning, sent me a text with a photo. "Hey Ethan, isn't this Olivia? Saw her at the Grand Lux last night. Didn't know she liked this place." The attached photo showed Olivia at a table near the window, smiling brightly across from a man I didn't recognize at first glance. Mark's tone was innocent, he clearly thought nothing of it, but my chest tightened. Olivia hadn't mentioned going out the night before. When I asked her about her evening, she'd said she stayed home to catch up on a book. I stared at the photo for a long time. The man sitting across from her wasn't just anyone, it was Ryan. I didn't respond to Mark. Instead, I sat with the image, studying every detail. Olivia's face was lit up in a way I hadn't seen in years. She was leaning forward, completely engaged, her hands resting lightly on the table. Ryan's expression mirrored hers, his posture relaxed and confident. The logical part of my brain tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was nothing more than an innocent dinner between old friends. After all, Olivia wasn't the type to keep secrets, or at least, she hadn't been before. But doubt has a way of planting itself, and once it takes root, it's almost impossible to ignore. That night, I decided to do something I'd never done before. While Olivia was in the shower, I picked up her phone from the nightstand. My heart was pounding as I swiped to unlock it, but her phone was password protected, and I didn't know the code. I put it back before she could notice, feeling a pang of guilt. Snooping wasn't like me. I prided myself on being rational and above suspicion. But something about that photo, her smile, the casual intimacy between her and Ryan, left me unsettled. The following days were a blur of second-guessing. I started paying closer attention to Olivia's habits, noticing things I'd overlooked before. She was more distracted than usual, her eyes drifting to her phone during conversations. She started dressing up more often, even for simple errands, and she seemed to be texting late into the night when she thought I was asleep. I told myself to let it go, to trust her as I always had. But the seed of doubt had already grown into something larger, something I couldn't ignore. Then came the second photo. Mark sent it a week later, this time with a note that said, "Looks like she's having a good time. Hope you're not jealous." The image showed Olivia and Ryan again, this time walking side by side along the waterfront. She was laughing, her arm lightly brushing his as they strolled. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. My initial reaction wasn't anger, it was confusion. Why hadn't she told me about these meetings? If they were harmless, why keep them a secret? I needed answers, but I didn't want to jump to conclusions. Confronting Olivia without proof felt like a betrayal of the trust we'd built over the years. But waiting in silence, letting my suspicions fester, felt unbearable. That night, as we sat on the couch watching TV, I glanced at her out of the corner of my eye. She was scrolling through her phone, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the screen. I forced myself to speak. "Olivia," I said, keeping my tone light. "Mark mentioned he saw you at the Grand Lux the other night. Were you out with someone?" Her hand froze for a fraction of a second before she looked up, smiling. "Oh, yeah. I met up with Ryan. You remember him, right? From high school? We ran into each other at the reunion, and he's in town for work." The ease with which she explained it made me feel foolish for doubting her. But something about the way she avoided my gaze set me on edge. "Why didn't you mention it?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "I didn't think it was a big deal," she replied, shrugging. "We just caught up over dinner. You've been so busy with work, I didn't want to bother you with something trivial." I nodded, forcing a smile, but her words didn't sit right with me. The Olivia I knew had always shared everything, no matter how small. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I realized I was at a crossroads. I could either confront her directly and risk pushing her away, or I could dig deeper to find out the truth. I chose the latter. Once the decision was made, I felt a grim sense of determination settle over me. I wasn't the type to act impulsively, but this wasn't impulse, it was survival. If there was something going on between Olivia and Ryan, I needed to know. The not knowing was eating me alive. The first step was simple, checking her phone. Late one night, after she had fallen asleep, I slipped out of bed and reached for her purse where she kept her phone. My hands trembled as I entered what I guessed was her passcode, her birthday. It worked. At first, I found nothing unusual. Her recent messages were the same as always: texts with friends, reminders to herself, and a group chat with our neighbors. But when I scrolled further, I found a name that hadn't appeared before: Ryan. The messages started innocuously enough. "Ryan, great seeing you at the reunion. Let's catch up soon. Olivia, you too. It's been forever." But as I scrolled, the tone shifted. The conversations were peppered with references to their past, to memories she hadn't shared with me. "Ryan, remember that night we snuck onto the football field? I still think about that. Olivia, I can't believe you remember that. Those were such good times." I kept scrolling, my stomach sinking with each message. Then came the ones that confirmed my worst fears. "Ryan, last night was incredible. I haven't felt this alive in years. Olivia, me too, but we need to be careful. I don't want him to find out." The room spun as I stared at the words on the screen. My heart raced, my breath shallow. I felt like I'd been punched in the chest, the air knocked out of me. The person lying next to me, the woman I had built my life with, was living a double life. I didn't confront her immediately. Instead, I took screenshots of the messages and emailed them to myself. I needed to process what I had found, to figure out my next move. The next day, I couldn't concentrate at work. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those words: "We need to be careful." The betrayal felt suffocating, but I knew I needed more proof. A part of me hoped I was misinterpreting things, that there was some explanation that didn't mean the end of our marriage. I decided to follow her. A few days later, Olivia mentioned she had a work meeting in the city. Her tone was casual, her expression unreadable. I nodded, pretending to be engrossed in my laptop, but my mind was racing. When she left the house, I waited 10 minutes before grabbing my car keys and heading out. I trailed her from a safe distance, my palms slick against the steering wheel. She wasn't heading to her office. Instead, she drove to a small cafe tucked away in a quiet corner of town. I parked a block away and waited. She stepped out of the car, glancing around as if checking to see if anyone was watching. Then he appeared: Ryan. He greeted her with a hug that lingered too long, his hand resting on her lower back. They went inside, laughing, completely at ease. I sat there, frozen, watching them through the cafe window. They leaned close as they talked, their heads almost touching. At one point, he reached across the table to take her hand, and she didn't pull away. I felt a mix of emotions I couldn't untangle: anger, sadness, humiliation. But above all, I felt numb. It was as if the life I thought I had built with Olivia was slipping through my fingers, replaced by something I didn't recognize. When she came home that evening, she acted as if nothing had happened. She kissed me on the cheek, asked about my day, and chatted about mundane things like dinner plans and the neighbor's new dog. Her ability to act normal was almost impressive. That night, I stayed up, replaying the events in my mind. Every laugh, every touch, every lie. I knew I couldn't keep this to myself any longer. The following evening, I invited her to dinner at our favorite restaurant, a place we hadn't been to in months. I told her I wanted to reconnect, to spend some time together. She seemed touched, her smile genuine. Halfway through the meal, I placed her phone on the table. "Olivia," I said, my voice calm but firm. "Is there something you want to tell me?" Her face went pale, her eyes darting between me and the phone. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. "I've seen the messages," I continued, keeping my tone even despite the storm inside me. "I know about Ryan." Tears filled her eyes as she whispered, "It's not what you think." "It meant nothing. Then why hide it?" I asked, my composure beginning to crack. "Why lie to me if it was nothing?" She started to cry, her voice trembling as she tried to explain. "I was lonely, Ethan. I missed feeling wanted. It was a mistake. I swear, it didn't mean anything." I wanted to believe her, but the damage was done. The Olivia I thought I knew was gone, replaced by someone who had chosen deceit over honesty. "I trusted you," I said quietly. "And now I don't know if I can again." The rest of the dinner passed in silence. That dinner was the longest meal of my life. Olivia's words replayed in my head as we sat there, her soft sobs the only sound breaking the silence. It didn't mean anything, she had said, over and over, as if repetition would make it true. But the betrayal wasn't something that could be undone with apologies. When we returned home, I didn't press her for more. She tried to talk, stammering explanations, begging for understanding, but I told her I needed time. Time to think. Time to decide what came next. The days that followed were a blur of tension and avoidance. Olivia seemed desperate to fix things, going out of her way to be attentive, offering to make my favorite meals or asking if I wanted to talk. But I wasn't ready. I couldn't even look at her without hearing Ryan's name or seeing that smile she'd reserved for him. I retreated into myself, burying my emotions under a veneer of calm. At work, I was a model of efficiency, though my co-workers noticed something was off. "You doing okay, Ethan?" my assistant asked one afternoon, her concern genuine. I waved it off with a polite smile, pretending everything was fine. At home, I spent hours alone in my office, staring at the photos and messages I had collected. I read and reread them, hoping to find some clue that would explain why this had happened, why the woman I had trusted more than anyone could betray me. But there were no answers, only more questions. One evening, I decided I couldn't live in limbo any longer. I asked Olivia to sit down with me in the living room, where the dim light of the fireplace cast long shadows on the walls. "I've been thinking," I began, my voice measured. "I need to understand why." She looked at me, her eyes red and puffy from days of crying. "I don't know how to explain it," she said softly. "I never meant to hurt you." "That's not good enough, Olivia," I replied, keeping my tone calm. "I deserve the truth." She took a deep breath, wringing her hands as she spoke. When I saw Ryan at the reunion, it was like a part of me woke up. A part one hadn't felt in years. It wasn't about you, Ethan. It was about me, about feeling young again, feeling noticed. I let her words hang in the air for a moment before responding. "So I didn't notice you? Is that what you're saying?" Her face crumpled as she shook her head. "No, that's not it. You've always been good to me. You've always been steady, dependable. But I let myself forget how lucky I was. And when Ryan came back into my life, it was like I couldn't help myself. I wasn't thinking." I didn't want to hear her excuses, but I listened anyway. I needed to hear the full scope of her betrayal, even if it tore me apart. "Did you love him?" I asked, my voice quieter now. She hesitated, and that hesitation was like a knife to my chest. "No," she said finally. "It wasn't love. It was a mistake. A stupid, selfish mistake." A part of me wanted to believe her. To cling to the idea that this was something we could fix. But another part of me, the part that had been holding everything together for so long, was crumbling under the weight of her words. "I can't just go back to how things were," I said, my voice breaking. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again." Tears streamed down her face as she reached for my hand. "Ethan, please. I'll do whatever it takes. Therapy, counseling, anything. Just tell me what I need to do to make this right." Her desperation was palpable, but it wasn't enough to mend the fracture between us. Trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt overnight, and the idea of sitting across from her in therapy, dissecting her betrayal, felt exhausting. "I need time," I told her. "And space. We can try counseling, but I'm not making any promises." Her nod was slow, her shoulders slumping as she realized how precarious our situation was. That night, I slept on the couch, staring at the ceiling as the events of the past few weeks replayed in my mind. The Olivia I thought I knew, the one I had built a life with, was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. Counseling began a week later. Olivia threw herself into it, eager to prove she was committed to making things right. She apologized again and again, her words trembling under the weight of her guilt. Our therapist, a calm woman named Dr. Monroe, encouraged us to explore our feelings without judgment. "How do you feel about Olivia's efforts to repair the relationship?" she asked me during one session. I hesitated before answering. I see that she's trying, I admitted. But seeing effort doesn't erase the hurt. It doesn't rebuild trust overnight. Olivia looked at me, her eyes full of sorrow. I know I can't undo what I did, she said. But I'm here, Ethan. I'm not giving up on us. Her words were earnest, but they didn't reach me the way they might have before. Something inside me had shifted, hardened. I didn't say it out loud, but a part of me wondered if love could survive this kind of betrayal. As the weeks turned into months, life resumed some semblance of normalcy. We attended therapy, went about our daily routines, and even shared a few moments of laughter. But beneath the surface, there was a rift that no amount of counseling could seem to bridge. Every time Olivia's phone buzzed, I felt a flicker of suspicion. Every time she left the house without me, I wondered where she was going. It was exhausting, living in a state of constant vigilance, and it wasn't long before I realized it was unsustainable. One evening, as we sat across from each other at the dinner table, I finally said what I'd been avoiding for weeks. Olivia, I began, my voice steady, I don't think this is working. She froze, her fork hovering mid-air. What do you mean? I mean us, I said, taking a deep breath. I've tried. I've really tried. But every time I look at you, I see him. I see the lies, the messages, the nights you spend with him. And I don't think I can move past it. Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't argue. Instead, she set her fork down and nodded slowly. I knew this was coming, she said softly. I just hoped. I hoped we could find our way back. Her admission brought a pang of sadness, but also a strange sense of relief. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. The decision to separate was mutual, though not without pain. We agreed to take some time apart, to see if distance could provide clarity. Olivia stayed in the house, while I moved into a small apartment downtown. The weeks that followed were a mixture of freedom and loneliness. I missed the life we had built, the routines that had once felt comforting. But I didn't miss the weight of betrayal, the constant second-guessing. One day, as I was packing up the last of my things from the house, Olivia approached me. She handed me a small box. I found this while cleaning out the closet, she said. Inside was a photo album from our early years of marriage. As I flipped through the pages, memories of our happiest moments came rushing back, our honeymoon, our first home, the countless adventures we'd shared. I don't expect you to forgive me, she said, her voice trembling. But I hope you'll remember that we had something real. Something worth cherishing. I nodded, unable to find the words. In the months that followed, we finalized the terms of our separation. Olivia started seeing a therapist on her own, and I threw myself into work, determined to rebuild my life. Occasionally, we'd exchange polite messages, a text on my birthday, a brief email about some shared financial matter. But the warmth we once shared was gone, replaced by a cautious distance. Looking back, I don't regret giving us a chance to reconcile. It showed me that some things, no matter how much effort you put in, can't be undone. Trust, once broken, is hard to rebuild. As for Olivia, I hope she finds peace with herself. I hope she learns from this, grows from it. And as for me, I'm still figuring out what comes next. But one thing I know for sure, I won't settle for less than honesty again. Was I wrong to give her another chance? What would you have done in my place? Write in the comments.